Okay, fine. Okay, so today we're going to just discuss different Aggada Gemaras, really just three basic approaches in the Rishonim and the various types of Aggada, different approaches to Aggada. But it's obviously, like you've been saying earlier, it's a much, much bigger discussion. Good evening. So just to start, just to go through a few examples of an Aggada Gemara, and some of these we'll come back to, some of these we won't. But some we just had over here in the Parsha, so we'll start with that one. There's a Gemara Katan, which we will discuss, which describes Paro's physical stature. So Amar Avital Afra Mishmei de Rav Paro Shai Bimei Moshe, Paro who lived during the time of Moshe, the Paro that we know. So who Amma? He was an Amma tall. Vizikno Amma, and his beard was an Amma. Uparmash Tako Amma Vizeres, and his place of procreation, that was an Amma and a half. L'kaim Mashanemer, this is a fulfillment of the pasuk. V'shefel anashim yakem alei, like the lowliest of people will stand over you, will be in control. And then you have what the Gemara describes Moshe, what Moshe looked like, how tall was Moshe. So Amarav Moshe Rabbeinu Eser Amos. Moshe Rabbeinu was 10 Amos. So he was 10 times, if we take this at face value, so Paro's an Amma. Moshe's 10 times that height. Shenemar, and the Gemara proves this by saying how Moshe threw the curtain, he threw the covering of the Mishkan over the Mishkan, and in order to do that, the Mishkan was 10 Amos tall, so he had to be 10 Amos in order to be able to reach over the Mishkan, so it must be that Moshe was 10 Amos tall. The Gemara says, Vayifresh Ha'ol ala Mishkan mi Parsho, and he spread the curtain over the Mishkan. Who did that? That was Moshe, and we know the beams were 10 Amos tall. It must be that he was 10 Amos tall. So if you take everything at face value, so then it's just a very funny conversation between Moshe and Aaron. Like you have this a person who's 10 times the height of Paro saying, "Let my people go," and the person looking back up at him, really looking all the way straight up. No, I'm not going to let you go, and it just creates a very funny picture. Then you have other types of Aggada. So these, at least, there's different heights of people. Then you have another Aggada also we'll touch on. So Amar Rabbi Shtoile Nechusa Yom. So this is the beginning, the famous parak, the fifth parak of Baba Basra, where there's just a whole blot of Aggada Gemara, very cryptic Gemaras. So Rabbi says they told me, those who go down to the river told me, Hagala de Matba Lesfina, there's this wave that capsizes ships, Mischazi ki tzutzisa denura chivarte bereshe. At the crest of the wave, so at the edge of the wave, as it's coming to the ship, so it has a white fiery tip, a white fiery crest. And now what does someone do if he sees this wave coming towards him? It will capsize the boat. So he takes a stick that's engraved on the stick, Eka Asher Eka, the pasuk Eka Asher Eka, Ka Hashem Tzivakos, and it should also have engraved on the stick, Ka Hashem Tzivakos, Amen Amen Selah. And he takes the stick, which has all these names of Hashem, and Amen Amen Selah, and then he hits the wave, Vinayach, and then the wave subsides, the wave calms down, and then he's safe to go. That will save him. You have later on in the same Gemara, Amar Rabbi Barbarchana, Zimna Chada Havika Azlinan Bisfinta. There's another time where I was going on a boat, and we saw this island over there without reading the whole Gemara, but we saw this island. We got off the island, we made a bonfire, we made a barbecue, and all of a sudden the island started to move and started to turn over. And we realized it actually wasn't an island, but it was this massive fish. And we just woke up. We had just woken up the fish because of the fire, because of the heat. The fish sensed the fire, and the Gemara concludes, if we weren't close to the boat, Hava Tavinan, we would have drowned. And that's the end of that story. So there's one discussion, just how to understand these Gemaras. These Gemaras, do we take them at face value? Do we take them, there's a deeper meaning? Do we take them on many levels? And then you have other areas of Aggada Gemaras. You have what Gemara we find a lot, it's an asmachta. The Gemara says, for example, how do you know that Bishul Akum is a problem? So the Gemara brings the Gemara in Avodah Zarah that says it's based on a pasuk, V'yachalti umayim bekesef titinli. When the Jewish people were in the Midbar, they bought water. So it seemed, or they got water and they drank the water. So the Gemara says we could get food which is like water, just like water doesn't change when you cook it up. When you put it on a fire, it just gets heated up, but it doesn't become something else. So let's say you have chicken. So chicken, when it's cooked, it becomes raw, and then you see a change in the chicken. It looks different. It becomes something else. Water, you heat it up. You put it in a bowl, you won't really be able to tell. It looks exactly the same. So it says the Gemara, Af so to any food which doesn't get changed by fire, that food you're allowed to eat. But any other food is going to be a problem. Midi orksiv, so the Gemara has to just, the pasuk doesn't mention anything about a fire. The Gemara says, you're right, Ela midarabanan v'kra smachta b'yam. It's only in a smachta. It's not really learned out from the pasuk. So how do you, what's in a smachta? Is it just a cute idea, a mnemonic? Is there some deeper meaning that the pasuk, there's no other way to understand the pasuk? How do you look at it in a smachta Gemara? When the Gemara says it's in a smachta, is there really something in the pasuk itself? That tells me this, I should learn this idea from the pasuk, or it's just nothing more. It's just there's no connection with Bishul Akum to that they bought water in the Midbar, and it's just a way. It's a cute way to remember things. How do you look at a smachta Gemara? We have another types of Aggada where it says, where you find this idea where it says, don't read the pasuk like this, but read the pasuk like that, and based on that we have a whole drasha. So one example of this is the Gemara in Ksubis, towards the beginning of Ksubis, it says, V'yaseh tia lecha al azeinecha, that when they went out to war, so they had a shovel with part of their weapons that they took out to war, they took a shovel with them. So the Gemara says, Al tikra azeinecha ala aznecha. Don't read it azeinecha like it will be with your weapons, but rather aznecha, read it like your ears. She'im yishma adam davar she'eino hagan, and we learn out a whole idea that if someone hears something that he shouldn't hear, he puts his fingers in his ears, and that's why it goes on and it says that's why the fingers of a person are shaped the way they're shaped and they're rounded, and a whole idea. So when the pasuk says don't read something like this, but read it like that, it's the same question. So what does that mean? It's just a cute idea, or there's something within the pasuk itself that there's a question, or it's even more than a question, but there's something within the pasuk itself that's pushing me to read azeinecha as aznecha. Or again, it's just another way where Chazal you have to give a drasha, you want to give a message across, so they find a pasuk over there and they just blame it on the pasuk, but really what they're trying to do is get a message across. Or no, there's something within the pasuk itself. And then there's obviously, then it continues with, it's the discussion as we were going through this, it just got bigger and bigger. When you have Aggada to Gemara, do you learn out halacha from it? How seriously does every Aggada? Is there a difference between Aggada and the Gemara and Aggada and Midrashim? The conversation could just get bigger and bigger. But we'll just at least start with the first thing, which is, when you have Aggadatas, when a Gemara says a Paro was an Amatal, how tall? If we were there, what would we have seen? How would Paro look to us? And these questions. When Moshe was 10 amas tall, would we also feel short when we met Moshe, or no? When the Gemara says 10 amas, it's something. It's telling us a message, but not to take it literally. So these are the different. That's what we're going to focus on today, and we'll see if we have time. We'll move on to another topic within this. So there's one of the Rishonim. I didn't put it on the sheet because Bar-Ilan doesn't have it, but there's a letter from one of the Rishonim who really asks this question. It's from the Ramah, where he writes. Someone more or less asks him a question: do you take Aggada literally or not? So he writes there and he says, how could you say not to take it literally? You have to take it literally, you have to take it at face value. Because why would you think the other way? And I'll prove it to you, he says. And he brings two proofs. But one proof is from the Gemara that's on the sheet. The Gemara says, the Gemara tells us that there were 3 places where Chazal spoke in hyperbole. There are 3 places in all of Gemara, all of Mishnayos. It seems like this Rishon is learning. There's only 3 places where things were divrei. The language of the Gemara is divrei b'lashon havai, which is something which isn't literal. It's something else. It's just an idea, but it's not literal. So he wants to argue the Rama if the Gemara is telling us that in only 3 places we were told that Chazal spoke in lashon havai, which is hyperbole or just a euphemism, then everywhere else it's not divrei havai. Everywhere else then is to be taken literally. And therefore he says, I'll prove it to you from this Gemara and one other Gemara, that Chazal, Aggada, as strange as it sounds, you take it literally. So Paro is 10 amas tall. When they got to that fish, or when you see a wave, there really is a wave with a fire at the tip, and the way to stop the wave is with a stick, with the names of Hashem written on it, and you take that, and that's how you have to take it. The question is, how do you get out? If we don't want to go with this approach, so what do you do with that Gemara? Because here the Gemara tells us there's only 3 examples where we find Chazal spoke in hyperbole, or in language which wasn't meant to be taken literally. So it's not the strongest proof, to be honest, because all the Achronim learned, they're very much bothered by this question, because it's not just, we find where the Gemaras themselves say, don't take it literal, or there's the Gemaras, and the Beer Sheva, one of the Talmidim of the Sma, he says, what does the Gemara say that in only 3 places not to take it literally? That's speaking about Mishnayos. In Gemara, we're not even discussing Brises. The only time we say Chazal, when the Gemara says that Chazal said things they were just using it as B'lashon Havai, not to be taken literally, there's only 3 times in Mishnayos. In other areas in the Gemara, Brises, other Tanaic works, for sure they could have spoken in hyperbole, and there's no proof at all from this Gemara. That's what will come out. I mean, you have to go through those who do Mishnah Yomi. So you have, what are the 3 places that, there are 3 places in Shas, then that there are only 3 places in Shas that we take where Chazal in Mishnayos didn't speak literally, meaning in a literal sense, they spoke more divrei havai. So one of them, I don't remember them all. I don't know. Some of them are in Kachim. So I don't know where you're holding in. You're in Nezikin?
We just started Shavuos, yeah.
Oh, you just Shavuos. Oh, okay. So this is a mission in Talmud, so you have a while. Okay. So there's 3 times. But when it comes to Gemaras, so it could be there's a lot more in Gemaras. So the raya is not such a raya. The proof is not such a great proof from this Gemara. The Shlado tells us that he brings down this Gemara about Paro. So it says again, Paro was short. He was short. His beard was as tall as he was, and he goes through the whole Gemara and he says, "Hamaimer hazeh amar darsheni." I agree that this is a very cryptic Gemara. However, avol chalila milomer shelo hayakach kefi pshutan shel dvarim. But on the other hand, we have to understand it exactly the way it sounds. Ki ein mikra ve'ein divrei rabboseinu zal yotzim midei pshuta. Because we have a rule, just like the Torah is supposed to be taken literally, but there's a deeper meaning, so too, we have to understand on a face value, even though there will be a deeper meaning to this as well. So in the Shlaz world, it sounds like that Paro was very, very short. That's how the Shlaz seems to go. Okay. That's what, just to bring out the different approaches without going through, first we'll go through the approaches and we'll see where it takes us. Another approach is more of a measured approach, which is, listen, some of the Gemaras are very strange. There's a Gemara that speaks about a frog, that the frog was the size of 60 cities. And it's very hard, says the Gemara, to take these very literally. So there's a little bit of a different approach, which a lot more Rishonim take, which is much more measured. That it depends. Some we take literally, some we don't take literally. The Ritvas says on that Gemara in Baba Basra, where he goes through all the different Gemaras, so he says, if you go through these Gemaras, these stories in this parak, in Yanim Zarm Livnei Adam, they'll sound very, very strange. Lefishalo hergul behem, because first of all, these are people, they lived in land, and most of the stories are about the sea, and people aren't used to hearing these stories. Vim dvarim krovim yod lahayodim betivim keinyan godel hadagim. If someone someone went down to the river, someone's used to being in the river, he'll see some of these big creation. It's on the back. Sorry, the back of this page in the Ritva. He'll v'godel saras gali ayam, and also see these tremendous waves as well. V'yesh gam b'maisis elu inyanim nirmazim. But at the same time, some of these stories aren't meant to be taken literally at all. They never happen. They're just hints to some deeper truth. Shiloh hayunir lehem b'maras ayin el b'mara chalom. They never saw these things. They had a dream about it, but they never saw this in the physical world. V'zeh ki sometimes they would go down to the ocean, they would see amazing things, and they would also spend time just meditating on these things. And when they went to sleep, so what happens when a person goes to sleep? He organizes everything in his mind, he dreams about it, and he could think of things that never happened. So there is some things they saw, and some things they saw in a vision in their sleep, because they spent a long time during the day thinking about these things. When they went to sleep, so now they dreamed this, but they dreamed it times 10, and therefore they saw, when they were awake, what looked like a large fish, and then when they went to sleep, so that fish just grew and grew and grew, because it was a dream. So that's what it's telling us. Now there's a deeper meaning to it, and that's this. The very strange ones will say, says the Ritva, those aren't meant to be taken literally. These are just visions that they had. There's a truth to it. It's a hinting to something else, but they're not meant to be taken literally. Where's? It's at the second last line. Second last line? Oh, because there are those people who they attribute like falsehood to tofle sheker. They're like a tuffle, like a secondary to sheker. They subordinate themselves to falsehood. So the migalglim milaglagim al divri Rabbi saying, and they just make fun of it. Nirmas b'ksas and yanim. So therefore, I have to explain it. Says the Ritva, some of these stories, because these stories are very far out. So that's like a middle approach, which is the first approach is most difficult to understand, but things are supposed to be taken somewhat literally, and could be a deeper meaning as well. A slightly easier approach is, it depends. Look at each Gemara, and some Gemaras you do take literally, some Gemaras you don't take literally, and you take at face value, some you don't, and that's a second approach. The most extreme approach the other way is, it's from the Raj, but it's really the truth is it's the Rambam's approach. The Rambam has, I didn't print it out, I didn't put it on the sheet, but very quickly speak it out outside. The Rambam in his Hakdama to Mishnayos and his Hakdama to Chelak, in two places. And many Achronim, the Ramchal, the Maral, they'll go with this approach, and we'll see some of these inside. But the Rambam starts off, in his introduction to Parachelik, it's a much longer discussion, where he brings down, over there he's discussing what Olam Haba is. So he speaks about what Olam Haba is not. Then he says, but before I tell you what Olam Haba is, I have to give you two introductions. And one of the introductions is how to understand the Aggada to Gemaras. And the reason why he gives the introduction is because all the people who describe what Olam Haba is, and they make a mistake about it, is because they're taking Gemaras and they're bringing proofs from Gemaras, but they don't understand how to learn a Gemara. And therefore their proofs don't have any basis because they just misunderstood a Gemara. So he says, therefore I'll have to tell you how to understand the Aggada to Gemara. So he says, he basically makes three groups of people. There's one group of people who take it literally, and they take it literally, and they look foolish, he writes, because certain things just can't be. The second group of people take things literally, and they say Chazal must be foolish, because it can't be. Those are the two approaches. But the basis of those two approaches, everything is meant to be taken literally, and you just have to have one of two conclusions. Either the person says, I believe everything, and the Rambam says, so it's just a foolish way of looking at things. Or the other way to look at it is, I take things literally, and Chazal must be foolish, because how in the world could someone believe that there's a frog that's so big? Or it just can't be. that's the second group of people. Says the Rambam, but the right approach is to understand that they spoke in. He gives an example in someone who's more philosophical. So he'll speak in a code. He'll speak in a language that is cryptic. So only someone who's holding somewhere, who understands the language of philosophy, will be able to understand. So when it came to some of the ideas in Aggada are super deep, and therefore it wasn't meant for everyone to hear, and therefore it was couched in this cryptic language in these parables and things, but there's a much deeper meaning for it. But don't take it super literally. It depends, some yes, some not, but that's more the Rambam's approach, which is the approach we're going to see now. So the Rajba tells us that he was asked this question. He says, I find a lot of Aggada Gemaras, and some of them are stranger than others, and I don't know, how do you understand them? So he says, am I allowed to, the one who asked the question seemed to ask him, am I allowed to, do I have to take them at face value, or I could take them that there's a deeper meaning to them, but I don't take them at face value? So he says, V'lo Amar Marshim. I'm not going to say we're allowed to take it not at face value, but I'm going to say mitzuvim mipi harav hagadol. We're instructed to not take it at face value. Lachas lechvod Rabboseinu hakadoshim, to preserve the honor of Chazal, of the Tanaim, of Amarayim. Ulaharbis b'mamareim hayishav abir b'derech sheyaskem le'emes belish, and we should try to figure out what the deeper meaning is, but not to take it at face value, because lo lahasher kol ha'agadas al pshuteim. Don't take all the Aggadas and take them at face value. Because like the Rambam tells us, there's going to be one or two things that will come out from it. There's either two paths you take if you take everything literal, and none of them are good. Im ha'amanas kol mashi supermin ha'archakos v'agzamois mibli hechreach b'torasam. If either a person believes everything they're told, even if the thing is very far out and exaggerated, and there's no reason to believe them, or the other way is to take it literally and say it can't be true, and what they're saying doesn't make sense because we see the truth around us, and there's no frogs that are that big in that example. But he says, now he takes it one step further. Don't take it literal, look for the deeper meaning, but when you get the deeper meaning, now you have to hide it. You can't tell everybody. Because a lot of times they conceal tremendously deep secrets, and they were written in this way to keep those secrets hidden. Because if it wasn't hidden, if it wasn't a secret, so why didn't they just tell us what they meant? So it must be that there's a deeper meaning which they're trying to hide, and therefore don't go look for the deeper meaning, but when you get it, keep it hidden unless, I guess, someone else is fitting to be taught the deeper meaning. So that's another approach. Is it what?
So this here.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll see sometimes Sod Hashem Lireyo.
Yeah.
In that, but it's not. There's no Aggada to there. In other words,
so usually in those Gemaras, that the Gemaras are saying that he knew something where there's no way he should have known it because he never experienced it. He didn't hear it from somebody else. So how did he know it? So there's a Sod Hashem L'Reiv. Hashem just told it to him. How he just because it was revealed to him somehow. The secret was told to him.
Right, but there's no story. There's nothing. In other words, there's no.
I'll give you
like
right.
when the Ravid says about the Rambam, he says Sod Hashem Lireyo, right? He
so that's an attack.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
no, but he's coming from Gemara. The Gemara. I'll give you one example. They had recently in Sanhedrin. It says over there that Dovid cursed Yoav because of what he did, and Shlomo was instructed to kill Yoav, and Yoav said it's not fair. Either you kill me, and take the curses, or give me the curses and don't kill me. You can't have both. Which the Gemara, what was the logic? The logic was that the only reasons why I got I was only deserving of the curse because I did something wrong, and I wasn't getting punished for it, so this would be the punishment. But now that I'm getting killed, so then I had no right to get the curses because this is my punishment. So that was his argument. And Shlomo says, I accept your argument, I will kill you, but I'll take the curses. And that's how the Gemara goes. And the Gemara goes, and it describes what the curses were. And one of the curses was that he'll always have someone who's a cripple in the family. So the Gemara asks, so where was this carried out? Where was this curse fulfilled? So the Gemara describes, I believe it was Asa, had to walk with a cane. And the Gemara explains what happened. He had some sort of illness. They said, I think article translated as gout. So he had gout. So the Gemara then describes what does gout feel like, and you'll tell us if this is accurate. But it feels like a needle in skin. Feels like someone's being poked with a needle. That's how the Gemara says. Ask Gemara now, how did he know that? So the Gemara gives three answers. Answer number one, he also had it. That's the easiest one. Answer number two is he heard it from somebody else. As Rabbi told him. The third answer is Sod Hashem L'Reyav. Hashem just told it to him. How? Because if a person's on a certain level, he just knows things. So it's not a story. It's just telling us, how do we know? That's just, on a certain level, a person knows. So when the Ravid's using it, it's an attack. Rambam, you just made it up. You're not coming from anywhere. It's Sod Hashem L'Reyav. So you just know it. Where? There's no basis. You just know it. So that's how that's the Ravid. But it's used in. But the idea is Sod Hashem L'Reyav, that a secret should be kept only for certain people. So it has different contexts to it.
Did he also apply to Midrash?
Midrash is even. Yeah, but I think I don't. Yeah, yeah, it would apply to Midrash. Could be I think there's additional rules by Midrash as well. But for sure, this approach that not to take it. That there's a message here and there's something, it's filling in something. But at the end, hopefully if we get to, there's one point which is, I think, worthwhile, is why, which is more part of the discussion, so why did Chazal do it? So we have a hint in the Rashba. There's a Rav Putner who will say, we'll get there, but there's different levels to reality, and they're all true, but in different worlds. And so that's what Medrash is, just a higher level of reality. So they're all going to be true. So hopefully we'll get there. And just to go through I don't know, when it's 8:15? So 15 minutes?
No,
8:30? Oh, okay. So the next thing, so you have the Mor Nevuchim. The Mor Nevuchim basically speaks out that don't think it's a problem to have this cryptic way of speaking. Avogam Eitzel HaPhilosophim, even by the philosophers, V'chachmei Umas, and whatever, the scientists, Mikadem hayu mastirm hadvarim haschalos umidabrim bechidas. They would also speak in riddles, and they would also couch what they're trying to say in cryptic language. For example, Alpalton. So Plato, when he would speak about Chomer and Tzura, he would say male and female. That was how that's how he would use it. Now, he didn't mean a male and female. He meant Chomer, whatever it is. The way the Maral explains, it's the material that's used, and Tzura. You have the table. The table is the shape, and that imposes itself on the tzura, on the material, or on the wooden. Let's say in a wooden table, and the tzura is the material that's used to the chomer is the material that's used to create the table, and the tzura is the shape of the table. The tzura can't be changed. The chomer could be changed into something else, but one is it's used as a term, male and female. But again, he's just bringing out that's a cryptic language. So those are basically what we have over here. We have three approaches. We have one approach which is take it more literally. The Gemara, they tried to bring a proof to that approach, and we saw from the Be'er Sheva it wasn't a great proof. We have more of a middle of approach, which is Depends. See what makes sense. See what doesn't make sense. If it doesn't make sense, don't take it literally. If it does make sense, then take it literally. And that's more of a middle approach. And then you have the Rajba's approaches. Almost you get the sense is don't take it literally. Always look for something more. Don't be satisfied with a simple meaning. And when you get that meaning, he goes and he says, then just keep it. Yeah, just Soda Shem L'Reyav. Yeah. So now I want to try to bring this third approach brings I think a very strong proof to this approach, that specifically don't take it literally. Because there's a Gemara in Eruvin. The Gemara in Eruvin says over a story, a very straightforward story. There was a Talmud, Rabbi Eliezer had a Talmud, he paskined the halacha when he shouldn't have paskined the halacha. Amar Rabbi Eliezer le'ima shalom ishto, and Rabbi Eliezer that day came home and he told his wife, by the way, Timi ani amizeh yotzei shenasa, I don't think this person will live out his year. Okay? Meaning the Talmud who paskind. And it turned out, v'lo hoti shenasa, and he didn't live out the year. Amar lo navi ata, so she asked him, how do you know this? You're a navi? He says, Amar lo no navi anochi, lo ben navi anochi, no. Elakach mekublani, this is my Masara, this is my tradition. Kol amora alacha b'fnei Rabbi chayiv misa. Anyone who paskins in front of his Rabbi is chayiv misa. And so says, now the Gemara continues. Okay, that was the story. It's not a very complicated story. It's a straightforward story. But Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, let me give you more details about this story. Also Talmud Yehuda ben Gurya Shemo. This was his name, Yehuda ben Gurya. V'hayirachak mimenu gimel parsos. The Gemara says, it says b'fanav haya. It was 3 parsos away, but the story was it was in front of him. So the Gemara says, v'harachak mimenu shlosh parsos kamar. So which one was it? Was it in front? Was it not in front? So the Gemara says, u'l'taymech shemo v'shem aviv lama. When it says over the story, so why does it go through all these details? His name, his name, his mother's, his father's name, how far it was. It was befanav. It was a befanav. It was a rachok. So the Gemara says one line: Shelo tomar mashal haya. So we don't think it's a mashal. So it's a very straightforward story. Someone did something wrong. They got punished. End of story. Not very. Generally, you turn the next page, you forget it. It's not a very exciting story, just a very straightforward, easy story. And they says the Gemara, I'm giving you a lot of details. Why? So you don't say it's a mashal. That's what the Gemara says. Otherwise, so the implication is, if I don't have all the details, then I assume it's a mashal, that it's a parable. And because otherwise, I don't need, because the only reason why I'm getting all the details is so I don't assume it's a mashal. That's how the Gemara reads. And says the Maral, that what?
Do you ever look at a story and say that, in other words, this is a very straightforward story.
Very straightforward.
So that's the main reason why no mashal, things like that. Paro being one amma and his beard, like, in other words, do you apply a certain sense of saying no, that story needs more. Of the school of thought that says that it is to be taken literally. Right. This is a very easy proof to say because it's okay. That's the halacha.
Yeah. So you're trying to prove from this which way?
Not proving. I'm just wondering, like, do we have permission to look at the story individually and then sort of critique it and say, no, this one, no, or this one, So
that's more the middle approach. The way the Shlosh says, that's why he spoke about the story of Paro. He says, you have to take it on 2 levels. One is, I would have seen Paro being an Amma. But I also have to understand that there's a deeper meaning there as well. That was the way the Shlosh said it, which is very strong language. He says, just like ein mikra yotze midei pshuto, just like a pasuk is taken literally, so too ein divrei Rabbeinu zal yotze midei pshuto. So too the words of Rabbeinu, the Chazal, also ein yotze midei pshuto. The same thing rule, whatever you'd apply to a pasuk, that's the rule that you apply to Chazal. Now psukim you take literally, but there's endless depth. So too Chazal, so you take it literally, but they'll have a deeper meaning there as well. So the second approach would. The second approach says, well, look at it. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? And then you could figure out. The third approach is the sense is you assume it's not literal. And that's the when you see a story, don't assume it's going to be literal. And even when it's And even when the story reads, that's what we're going to take out from this Gemara. Even when the story reads in a very easy way, and there's nothing vague and there's nothing cryptic about it, the Gemara has to give us all this information to tell us that it's not a mashal. That means if I see a straightforward story, then the implication would be that it should be a mashal. That's what this Gemara seems to be telling us. And Ben Yoyada brings this as a raya, but they didn't have in Bar Ilan.
What happens if there's a story that contradicts another story?
Never happens. Yeah.
Moshe Rabbeinu being 10 feet, 10 amas.
Right.
I don't know who Rashi quotes, but he says, and Moshe can hold up the, when he did it for the Shiva Yimei Kavuyim, right, says that he put it up himself.
Right.
Rashi brings down to somewhere, he says, like, what, Moshe could do it himself? Of course he couldn't do it himself. They were much too tall.
Right. No, so that's not a contradiction.
He has to start.
No, they were much too heavy. It wasn't tall, heavy.
I don't remember it. No, it wasn't feasible.
Rashi was heavy. That's what
It was heavy?
Yeah.
So it was.
Yeah. But you will have contradictions. For sure. And so there's going to be two approaches. I'll give you what the Rav Dassler says at the end. You have the end of Sota, right? He just brings this, it's just the easiest place to bring it. I think he speaks about it over there. It says what will happen at the end of times. It gives a list of about 10 things. So ask the Rav Dassler, so which one will happen? So Rav Dassler looks at it, that it's all one point that they're trying to describe. They're all trying to describe this one point. And there's different, like, when, I don't know if this is a good example, I don't know if he gives this example or someone gives it, or I'm using it in the wrong context. You know the famous mashal with a bunch of people when it's dark and they try to figure out the room, which part of the elephant it is. They're all describing the elephant, but they're not, is it floppy? That's the ear. The next person's holding onto the tail. Each one holds onto a different part. They're all describing the same thing, but it's one aspect of it. So if we could somehow put all the pieces together and build a complete picture, we would get what's the nekuda that all these things are an outgrowth of. So they're describing, I guess in medical terms, it's the symptoms of what the illness is. So what the nekuda that we're talking about, these are different ways of it may manifest, or different aspects of it, but they're all saying there's one underlying root, one shorish for all these things. I think that's how he says it. So either you could say it's a machlekes, or they're bringing out different aspects of it. And it depends. You'd have to go through the different ones to see. So the Maral brings this, and he says, "Rov ki rov v'atatir." Now you should know. You should see ki rov divreim hem b'mashal b'mlitzas hachachma. Most of what Chazal say is mashal, melitza, b'mlitzas hachachma, and just ways of expressing things in a poetic way. And he brings our Gemara, the Gemara that we just learned, and he says, "Mitaretz b'fanav makshe v'aracha k'menu utaymech." Tomar lo mashal hayu. Hare mimnei shederech hachachamim ledaber b'mashal. So says the Maral, you see from this Gemara in Eruvin that it was the normal way for the chacham to speak, and to speak in mashal kishemedabrim b'dvarim neflam, when they speak about big things, big ideas, amazing things. Kemo zeh sheRebbi Elazar amar lo yotzi eshenaso v'chein haya. So too, the Rebbe Eliezer said he won't live out the year, and he didn't live out the year. That could be seen as something amazing, astounding. V'yesh lalos aladash mashal, and therefore I could have thought that maybe it's only a mashal. Therefore, the Gemara told us no shekach hayabemis, that it really happened. V'imkein hadvar masher heim muflagim, and therefore anything that's muflagim, which is it's beyond what we're expecting. Kasher lo pirshu she'eno mashal, unless they say it's not a mashal. Kimoshe pirshin kam, like they said over here. Hein divrei chachma vehein kemo mashal. Assume it's a mashal. That's what Maral takes out of this Gemara. Ulefikach ein litmo kasher yira b'divreihem haneron l'schalam rechokim and adas. And therefore, don't be excited when you see something that seems strange. Shehem divrei chachma, assume it's just the mashal. It's telling us something more. V'chol shekein kasher yimsa b'divreihem dvarim shenirim chas v'shalom shemaitim mefod yisbar. He says, anytime you find a real question, you could assume that it's going to be a mashal. That's what the Maharal wants to take out of this Gemara. And we see this again. This is the Ben Ish Chai. He has a tshuva sefer where someone asked him this shaila, he says, am I allowed to look at the stories in the 5th parak? Could I assume they're a mashal? And he gives the same thing. I'll prove to you. He says, it doesn't tell us that it's a mashal. It doesn't tell us it's a riddle, that there's something more. So he says, they don't have to tell you it's something more, because you could understand that yourself. They should have, because although they knew it as a mashal, but we, in the later generations, don't necessarily know it's a mashal. So he says, we see from this story that here they told us it's not a mashal, therefore the assumption is that it should be a mashal. A very similar approach from the Maral, that from this Gemara in Eruvin, that one could prove that when there's something that's even a little bit atypical, meaning a little bit more out of the norm, it's not a halachic Gemara, then one could assume that if it's a Aggada Gemara, one could assume it's a mashal. That's what the Maral, the Rabbi, and the Ben Ishchai in his Sefer Torah Lishma want to prove from this Gemara. So this is the third approach. So we had the literal approach, the opposite of that, and then somewhere in the middle you have to kind of work out each Gemara. Now we have just a couple shaylas. Why would they do this? Why would they speak in riddles? Just tell us the truth. Tell us what they mean to say. So we saw a little bit from the Rashba. But elsewhere the Rashba gives a few reasons, without going through all of them. But he says just one cute reason. He says in the second paragraph in the Rashba, the first paragraph he gives two reasons, but in the second paragraph he says, because a lot of times they would give drushes, and they would give drushes for a long time. And what happened would... and everyone would be sleeping. And in order to wake them up, so they would say very strange things, to shock them, and to wake them up from their sleep.
Interesting. It's almost like talking to the weaker student, as opposed to saying it's secret and it's for the higher student. Here you're saying it's for the student that is lazy and falls asleep. We've got to create these stories. It's almost opposite approach. I hear that. Yeah. So in the if you go earlier, he speaks out that reason for to hide things. Then he says, so if we had to work it out, I would argue and say that there's different types. He's not saying 3 different reasons, and then this would obviously take a lot of work, where you have to go through and sort through and come up with 3 categories of Aggada Gemara. Some would be, they're so cryptic. Let's say the stories in Baba Basra. Those are just, it's more than just, there's clearly a very deep message over there, and the Gra has a whole sefer, a whole little booklet just on these things. Then you have other Gemaras which are just that, just to wake up the students. The Gemara famously says that Rabbi Akiva told his students that why did Esther rule over 127 kingdoms? Because Sarah lived 127 years, and the Gemara I believe says there he was waking them up. So we have a category. I wouldn't say that they're contradicting reasons. I would love to be able to work out a whole different categories of Chazal, where one, there's the waking up Agadata, there's the cryptic Agadata, there's the different types of Agadata. It's almost like giving someone a gematria and making them think of the numbers and having fun with it.
Exactly. Yeah, that would be like this one, just to wake them up. Exactly. Yeah, that's what I would like to say. But again, it's just an idea. I don't have any proof. So here the Rashba gives a different example. Rabbi hayidarish v'nisnamnem hatziba. Rabbi was darshaning, so no one has to feel bad anymore. But Rabbi darshan, they were falling asleep. Bikesh la'oram, he wanted to wake them up. Yolda, and what did he say? He said a woman gave birth in Mitzrayim shishim riba b'kermecha to 600,000 kids in one shot. V'haisa shem talmud echav Rabbi Shmuel b'Rabbi Yossi Shmuel. There was a Talmud there, and he said man havas kain. He said what does that mean? So he says, Zu Yocheved Shielda Moshe. It just means Yocheved gave birth to Moshe, who was equal to the Jewish people, so 600,000. He just said it in a way that would just shock them into waking up, so that would be one reason why Agadata is there. I think Rabbi Breidowitz, Rabbi Breidowitz's brother, in Eretz Yisrael. So someone once asked him, I was listening to one of his things, someone once asked him, why do we have Aggadatas? So he basically said this reason, but a little different twist on it. He said that when you go through, sometimes the Gemaras are so difficult, you just need a mental break. So you have a Aggada Gemara kind of to relax, give you a mental break, and then it goes back to it. So that's how he said sometimes, just on a very simple level, what's the purpose of Aggada? But so we saw the Rajba, the cryptic thing. Here the Rajba says it's simply to wake up people, but these are different reasons why speak in riddles. But then there's a much deeper idea, which is from Rav Hutner. So let's try to get through this. So he brings from the Maral about Bas Paro, Nairoseh, they were going on the river, right, the daughter of Paro, and he brings that they were going without spending time on the Maral. It's a little difficult, but they were going, and it says over there that they all died. All her maidservants died. There was one maidservant left because they didn't want her to take Moshe, so they got punished, and Malach came and struck them down. V'holchos hainu Moshe holach, and the Maral writes on this, Demisa zuhi misa elyona. If you were there, it's a misa elyona. It's not a physical death, it's a more spiritual death. Ki nistalek me'em koach u'mazalam legamri. Their mazel was taken away from them. Without going into what it means, v'zehu misa elyona, physically they were there, but spiritually there was something missing. And once their mazel was gone, so they didn't have a problem with Basia saving Moshe. And the Maral says, Mibnei Kain lo nisparish lahedya ma'urazu b'seder hatzalah shel Shem Moshe Rabbeinu. And because it was more of a spiritual death as opposed to a physical one, so when it's described how Moshe was saved, it doesn't mention that the maidservants were struck down. Ayin Sham, take a look over there. That's the Maral. So what it says, Rav Hutner, without getting to what the Maral means in this particular case, but Kavanas devar of Kachish Maral he ki mikivan de histakol ba'araisu bara alma. When Hashem created the world, He looked into the Torah. Memela kol hashivim panim l'Torah yeshlem panim hamakbilim. Now we know there's 70 different approaches to Torah, and Hashem looked into the world. He saw 70 approaches. So that means there's place for 70 different realities in the world, makbilim ba'olamas, or in worlds that were created. V'kol panim b'Torah megalim hemasapanim asher le'umasam ba'olamas. And every time a person gets in a new approach to Torah, so he's revealing something which is going on in some worlds somewhere, which is connected to that approach. Umebnei kain mashen esgala b'Torah b'panim shel pshat. So just without the 70, just on a very simple level, he says, when we read the Torah, that's pshat. When it says Moshe Basia stuck out her hand and she pulled in Moshe. If we were there in the world of Pshat, Pshat Ba'olam HaPshat, that simple reading that's what we would see in the world of Pshat. Then there's a world of Remez. There's another higher level of Torah, which is Remez. And that corresponds to the world of Remez. So in a different world, in a higher world, whatever we learn in Remez is really happening just in a different world. And this is true about everything. And all the different approaches to Torah. They all have a place there. And this is what the Maral means. So meaning, without explaining what the different deaths are. So in the world of Pshat, it doesn't say anywhere that the maidservants were struck down. So in the world of Pshat, in our reality, we would see the maidservants there walking along and being not touched. And they would walk with her to the water, she would stick out her hand, and then she would bring in Moshe, and they would all walk back to the palace together. That's in the world of Pshat, because that's what the words of Torah tell us. Then the Midrashim come along and say, no, you know what happened? The maidservants were struck down. Her hand stretched 60 amas. In the world of, what was going on, we'll say in Shemayim at that time, they all died. In our world, which is the world of Pshat, they're all living. But in the world of Drush, in this higher reality, they were all dead. Ask Maral, what does that mean? So it means their mazel got killed, whatever that means. In the world of Pshat, she stuck out her hand and she picked up the basket. In the world, what was really going on, her hand stretched out 60 amas, which, I don't know, just thinking this year, imagine if you were her for a second and you stuck out your hand to try to get it, and all of a sudden your hand started growing. Would you let it grow for 60 amas? I don't think I would. Just let my hand grow and grow and grow for 60 amas, the Midrashim say. No. In her world, it didn't happen. If we were there, we would not see her hand stretch out. In Shemayim, what was happening, her hand was reaching out 60 amas.
Perhaps because it was such a leap for her, the daughter of Pharaoh, to save a Jewish child. That went like, and you said talking about today,
Yeah.
it's like somebody, let's say when we hear some Muslim people speak so well of Israel, a Muslim is Arab.
Yeah.
It's like sticking his hand out.
Some say that. Some learn that into Rashi. I've seen that shot. Yeah. That's what Rashi means. It's
a Pharaoh going against
yeah.
the most fundamental rule that he created. She really had to stretch.
Right, and more than that, she had to introduce him. At one point they met, Paro Moshe.
Who is this kid?
Yeah, I found him in the river. Like, to be able to do that, then it was a 60 amma jump. Yeah, so that I have seen that shot in Rashi. But this would be a little different approach. I'll show you one more example, which is a little bit easier.
So does that mean that he holds that all three, because we presented three different schools.
So it comes out like this.
You could have,
So he's speaking about Midrashim and Pshat.
If you go by Pardes, that means
all four realities are true.
correct.
Just in different places, just in different...
So it's not like the first, not like the second. In other words, this shot seems to say that within...
It's exactly how they describe, but we don't... But the way with what he's really saying is it is a very deep idea, like you're saying. What he's really saying is, I'll give you one example, and then we'll see this in another example, and then we'll stop. But it says that Esther grew a tail. Vashti grew a tail for Esther to become the queen. Vashti grew the tail. So then, if we were there, would Vashti grow the tail? Says the Maharal, we would not see that. It doesn't say in the pasuk, says Rafutner. But in Shemai, what happened? The Maharal says she became very sluggish. She couldn't move. She was so. It says the Maharal, you know what that means in the spiritual world. You know how that's described? That's described as a tail. We just don't have our language is different than the language that's used in the spiritual world. But in the spiritual world, that's exactly what happened. She had a tail. Would you have seen the tail? No way. But did she have a tail? 100%. They're both true, but in different realities. We just don't have the right words. That's what Rafutner is saying. So meaning when Chazal say Paro was an Amma, we didn't go back. If you take a look at the next Ber Agola, he explains it. Just in a very simple level. If Paro was an Amma, Moshe's even easier. We have an expression, he's a 10 out of 10. He's a, right? So what Moshe was, he wasn't 10 Ammas. If we would have seen Moshe, we would not have seen necessarily 10 Ammas. But in Shemayim, you know how big he was? He was a perfect 10. And Paro, he was so connected, I don't remember exactly how he says it, but he was so low to the ground. In this world, he may have been taller than Moshe. But in Shemayim, he was an amma tall. And his beard was his amma, and his other aver was an amma and a half. That's who he was in reality, in the spiritual world, that's who he was. Would we have seen that? Absolutely not. But is it 100% true? Absolutely yes. But not in this reality, in the reality of Drush. In the spiritual world, that's what it is.
And the fact that there's a proof because you have the pasuk and 10 amas, so...
Yes, what? That's all part of yes. So that just...
You shouldn't need it, right? You should just be able to say he's 10 amas, or that tells you that he was 10 amas.
That's the proof that they gave. So we say that Yaakov Avinu lo mes, and we prove it from a pasuk.
The Gemara says children.
Oh, but that's a pshat already.
Right.
But if we were there, it's brought it from a pasuk, but we would have seen Yaakov be buried, right?
That's the Gemara says.
Right.
Right. Things like that, right?
Right. But it came from a pasuk. You see.
You could see people speaking. Even today, you see, oh, he lives on in his children. He lives on in his.
In his work and his book, right, whatever it is. Yeah. No. Yeah.
Tzadikim in Dvarim, right?
Right. Dovos bekever. Whatever. Yeah. You'd have all these. Yeah. But meaning, so whatever that pasuk is telling us, but whatever you say with that pasuk, why can't you say the same thing with Moshe's pasuk? We see he carried that means he had because he was so big, so Hashem enabled him to pull I wouldn't have been able to do it, even if I was 10 amas tall, because I was a Moshe. Moshe, whether he was 6 feet tall, 6.5, whatever, however tall he was, but spiritually he was 10 amas tall, and that's why he could that's why he could cover the Mishkan. Like it could be learned like that as well. And just to bring one other example, which I think it's a very easy way of bringing it out. But that would be one. So that's how the Maral will explain this. So they're both true. Another last example. It says by the war with with Avram against the 4 kings, the 5 kings. So he's fighting against the 4 kings, and what does he do? He hears that Lot's captured, and he takes out Shmona Aser Vishlosh Meos, 318 of his students, and they go out and they fight, and they're victorious. Says Rashi, well, it's a machlekes. Who was he? Was it Eliezer? That's the gematria of Eliezer's 318, or was it 318? So which one was it? So Rav Hurtner would tell you, the Maral would say, I'm assuming, that they're both true. If you were there in the battle, al pi pshat, you saw 318 people. But you know who was really fighting this battle? You go with the drush, which is gematria. The drush is 318. It was only Eliezer. It was Avram and Eliezer. So what does that mean? It was the merit of Eliezer and Avram that they were victorious. But it's 2 realities, and they're both true. But we don't have. But to say that we take everything literally, and that's how we would have seen it, that would be a mistake. And that's so meaning this third approach, they're both it's not the first approach. The first approach is take it at face value, and that's what we would have seen. This approach is take it at face value, but we would never have seen it. But it's exactly how it is, but in a more spiritual world, in a higher world, somewhere else, whatever, in the world of drush, whatever that corresponds to. So it's 100% true, but it's not speaking to us, what we would see in our world of pshat. We live in the world of pshat. This is describing what's going on in the world of drush. And they're both true, but in their own world. So that's the that's the way the Rav Hutner would go. And I guess we're out of time, but I guess we'll leave the whatever. I guess for a different discussion, the rest of it. Yeah.
Your column, your weekly column, the Parsha tidbits, where you bring Midrash.
Yeah, it's
You call it "Did you know that?"
right.
And it's.
Yeah.
You stopped already?
Oh no, I didn't touch it. It's